Hey everyone, how are we doing today? We have a lot to discuss. So, tonight, as promised, I'm going to do kind of an overview of the shape of the world as we see it right now from an economic standpoint and what we're really looking at in this crazy new world that we find ourselves. So, let me put up a presentation so that I can show you guys some numbers as we go. Um, all right, getting the hang of this live streaming thing. All right, so if we're going to look at what does economic outlook look like, how are we going to do this thing? Um, then we've got to ask the question of where are we going, right? So right now, we're in a situation where economic indicators are all going in the wrong direction. So your classic metrics, inflation, stocks, unemployment, and general consumer sentiment are all headed in the wrong direction, right? They're all headed down. Inflation is headed up. There's a general sense that things are not going well with the economy. Like consumer confidence is at lows not seen since 2008. Like that's pretty earth-shattering, and certainly the people I talk to report that they feel like something fundamentally is changing in the way the US works, and I would agree with that. The ground under our feet is moving rapidly, and it's incredibly disconcerting. So I put up this saying, you've probably all seen it, the hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And I put this up to remind us that everything is cyclical, everything comes around again, and that what is required to get from anything difficult into something better is strength. It is personal strength, and that strength is scary. So this is a level of moral courage that the US population has not broadly had to exhibit for about 3 generations. Not since the World War II generation have we faced something this broad and on our own home turf. So as we go through this conversation, remember that everything can be turned around, that you have strength you don't know that you have, and you're gonna find it soon. And that we can, in fact, come out of this better. There are solutions. So let's get into it. So, this administration has said that they want to take us back to the economy of the late 1800s. So, if we look at what that economy was, so we're talking about the economy from about 1865, so the end of the Civil War, to the Great Depression in the 1930s. So, a little less than a century. So during that time, there was a lot of volatility in our economy. We had multiple recessions, like recessions are nothing new. They have happened since economies existed. And if we look at kind of what those recessions looked like for that 80-ish year period, or 60, 70-ish year period, on average, a recession took out a fifth of the economy, which is a lot. It lasted about a year and a half of severe economic depression, really, what it would feel like to us these days. A depression technically has to last 3 years, so they weren't depressions. And they happened every 2.5 years, which, if you do the math on that, means on a 4 year cycle on average, you would see explosive growth, right? 20 to 40%, and then catastrophic collapse. Um, and then down for a year and a half, and then up for a couple of years, and then back down again. So whipsawing of economic output and whipsawing of the home economy in terms of income and ability to buy things and have stability. So after the Great Depression, multiple regulations were passed. We had a whole social safety net package, right? We revolutionized the way we approach business, right? We created the Federal Reserve. We switched to an income tax instead of tariffs. That actually happened in like 1913. But we radically shifted toward more free trade and internal income taxation over tariffs. The net result of that was far more stability. So the average recession since the Great Depression took out about 8.5% of our economy, right? So this is less than half as bad on any individual recession. It lasted half as long, basically, 10 months instead of 18, and happened way less often, right? So every 5.5 years instead. So 5.5 years between recessions instead of 2.5 years. So we went from having what would feel to us today, two major catastrophic economic collapses a decade, to having one inconveniencing, uncomfortable recession a decade. That's what that created since World War II, since the Great Depression, is a period of economic stability. The regulatory framework prevented these wild swings up and down that we experienced between the Civil War and the Great Depression, and that ultimately caused the Great Depression. It put guardrails, right? So there's still variability, but it's way less. Recessions still hurt, but not like they used to. And on that, our country has experienced a tremendous amount of growth, right? And the net result is that there is no one alive today that remembers what it was like under that old economy. The economy that Trump says he wants to bring back is one that doesn't even exist in stories people remember anymore. Right. So I am old enough that my grandparents lived through the Great Depression as children and young adults. And I remember their stories about being poor in the Depression. Most adults these days don't remember those stories, and the people that lived through it are gone. So, what we're looking at is a whole population that has never experienced the level of economic household instability that this system creates. What Trump is talking about in undoing the regulatory and business framework that has been in place since the 40s and 50s, changes, and we can talk about details, but basically is taking us back to a time where you could never count on anything, where all you had was this tiny little bubble, and that little bubble could be taken away from you at any minute. So let's take a look at what life actually looked like. What was the average American's life like in that system? To start with, there was no way to build wealth. Like today, we do things like run a 401k calculator that says, well, if I get an average of 8% year over year growth, then if I'm putting aside, 6% of my income or 10% or 15%, then by the time I retire, I should have, right? And we're doing these math equations, right? Projecting the future, because since the Great Depression, we've had a remarkable period of stability, and that math has been true. But that didn't used to be true in the economy they want to go back to. No one would ever count on getting a return from a bank because banks crashed, right? You can't lose a fifth of your economy and not lose a fifth of your banks. And when that happened, there was no FDIC, and Trump has already talked about getting rid of the FDIC. If your money was in a bank, it disappeared with the bank. And so you had nothing. And that was a common enough experience that everybody was somebody or knew somebody who had lost everything to a bank. So the average experience was survival, not comfort, not disposable income, not vacations, not any of that. You survived. And that was as much as you could hope for. If something happened to you, then you could very well just die. If you didn't have family who could take you in and take care of you when you were sick, injured, old, young, or otherwise disabled, then you went on the streets. That is why we have Social Security. That is why we have Medicaid. That is why we have Medicare, because we lived through this period where people would have something happen. You're in a car accident and break your leg. You get a disease and you're in the hospital, right? And you lose your job and you're sick when you come out and you can't do that physical job that is the only work you could get at the time. And so you lose your house. And there was no recourse. There was nothing to save you. There was nothing to catch you other than your family. Someone had to take you in. So the cost of that on a household level is enormous, because who doesn't take in their family when they're hard up, right? When they've got a problem. But then you have to find a way to support another person. And remember, this is an economy where there isn't disposable income. There isn't vacation time. There is just more and more and more to do on less and less and less. So that was common, to have your parents, your children, your grandparents all living with you if you were a working age adult. The economy was run by a set of robber barons. So at that time, it was, Vanderbilt. These days, it's pretty easy to name the names of who would be in that, right? We've got Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos and Gates and, right, the handful of billionaires that want to control everything. And in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and early 1900s, those robber barons used tariffs to make sure that no one could come and compete with them in the domestic market. They established monopolies, which we have seen today in all of those names I just gave, so that they could charge people as much as they possibly could. We saw companies create towns, make people move to the town so that they could pay you $100 and charge you $99 in rent and make you go into debt to buy your food at the company store. So they pay you a salary, but they're going to guarantee they get it all back, plus your work. This is the system they want to go back to. Musk is already looking at investing in a company town in South America to try out the concept. And if you think these other billionaires haven't looked at it and said, oh, that's a good deal, right? We can say that we're paying people enough, but really we're charging them double price for a place to live, food to eat, and clothes to wear. So they end up more in debt to us than they were before after they've worked for us. And we can dictate, well, you owe us money, so now you have to work more hours. And suddenly we're in an 80-hour work week. Right? This is how we got the workplace rules that we have, because companies did this once already. Right? We fixed this problem, and now he wants to take us back. And now he wants to recreate the hell that we lived through once. And couldn't organize because those company towns had great propaganda. And those company towns would break up meetings. They knew if the people working organized that they were done. And so for decades, they actively prevented that from happening. They called in the police. They broke up unions. They stopped work stoppages with bullets. They put American workers in what were effectively concentration camps. This is how we lived under this economy. And this is what he wants us to go back to. This is what he's creating, or what he wants to create. So, understanding where he wants us to go, the next logical question is, are we actually going to go there? Is this going to happen? What is, if we read the tea leaves, what is probably going to happen from here? Okay, so as I look at the headlines, as I look at what Trump says, what Musk says, what Bannon says, what Miller says, what the administration is actively doing in courtrooms, on the ground, using ICE, using police, what they're doing in the military, what they're telegraphing to our allies and our enemies. What I see happening, or I'm going to go through today, what the best possible scenario is in terms of overall reduction of human suffering, right? So this is my metric. The fewest people hurt the least, okay? So I'm going to look at the best case scenario, the scenario that I think is most likely, and the worst case scenario, which is real bad. So we're going to talk through what those three look like. And then I've got some hard actions that you should be taking right now, because the next step, the thing you should do tomorrow and the thing you should do next week doesn't matter, doesn't change based on which of these scenarios we end up with. So the best case scenario, honestly, is if there is a huge public uprising, Congress impeaches Trump and his entire cabinet, and we just have to clean up the mess that exists right now. In that scenario, our economy would bump, but would recover fairly quickly. We would see a recession that looks familiar to us, right? So that 5, 8, 9% reduction in overall output that lasts for about a year, and then we bounce back, right? The stock market bounces back. We've got some legal things that probably fall out. We've got some political things, instability. We got to get our footing back on us. But in terms of net damage, that is the least harm option, which makes it the best case scenario. Now, you'll notice it's not what I think is going to happen. And the reason for that is that right now, according to public opinions, 45% of Americans approve of what Donald Trump is doing. And as much as I want to say that they just don't know any better, the fact of the matter is some people want other people to hurt. Some people believe that certain populations are better than other populations. And they don't care if people get hurt as long as what they want, the way they see it, happens. And that's terrifying. It is fundamentally un-American as far as I'm concerned. But there is a significant 25-ish, probably, percent of the US population that will never agree that what Trump is doing is wrong. There's another 10 or 15% that are entrenched in the idea of Trump as an identity, and they are also not going to turn their back on him until they personally experience a level of pain that they cannot ignore, that breaks through the cognitive dissonance. And that's a lot of pain. And we've got another 10% that are waking up now. So I would expect to see that 45% approval rating continue to drop, but I would be shocked, honestly, if it dropped below 40% before the whole country goes to hell. Congress, theoretically, could end this thing, but the Republicans in Congress have shown zero spine, and the Democrats are not really any better. So Congress is not going to impeach him, even though they probably, a majority of them do, in fact, understand what is going on. Not all, but enough. So that means that Trump faces no effective backlash. He is already saying that he's going to defy court orders. He's already saying impeach judges. So the odds of there suddenly being a wake up are pretty low. Now, I do want to say that it is not zero, and fighting for the chance is worth it. So if you have a chance to get in the street, to contact Congress, to do something to use your civic power, especially if you are a citizen in a red district, like I am, who has a representative that thinks they're safe, who thinks because they've got a little R next to their name that they can't possibly be defeated at the ballot box, right? If you are in one of those districts, push. It takes less than 5 minutes to call your 2 senators and your representative. I do it every day, and it's worth doing because it would be amazing if we could make the best case scenario happen. So anyway, that's an aside. Let's talk now about what I think is most likely to happen. So I think Trump is going to continue to do tariffs. He's going to raise them. He's going to put them on. He's going to take them off. He's going to keep pissing off all of our allies, and he's going to keep buddying up to what have classically been our enemies. Yes, I'm looking at you, Russia. All of that is terrible for the economy. Businesses do not want to invest unless they know they're going to have a stable rate of return. They want to know that prices are going to be the same. They want to build their spreadsheet. And I built these spreadsheets professionally. I know. They want to build their spreadsheet with a 3% flat inflation rate estimate and figure out what their cash flows look like for the next 5 to 10 years. So they can calculate a nice, tidy return on investment and make a decision in an environment that is stable. What Trump is doing wrecks all of that. So businesses are not going to invest in anything that they can avoid investing in. The stock market is going to continue to decline. Trump is going to keep cutting government and radically. And so this has a bunch of knock on effects. So you have a direct impact to unemployment. You have a lot of people who have had very stable jobs with good benefits that are now unemployed. And they're unemployed across the country. They can't pay their mortgages. They can't buy groceries. They don't go out to lunch whenever they're at work. They don't do any of that. So we have rising unemployment and a lack of consumer spending, right? So we've got a double hit to the economy. And you've got the fact added in here, right? Aside from the people he's firing, he's also canceling massive numbers of contracts. So a huge amount of domestic government spending is stopping. And there's a whole nother cascade, right? It's about a 4-to-1 ratio if you look at the statistics. For government spending, for every federal worker, there are 4 private sector workers working. And so because he's hitting both of those, right? If you see him drop 10,000 federal workers, you should count on another 40,000 in the private sector disappearing because the funding isn't just the salaries, it's also the contracts that he's canceling, that he's refusing to pay, that were already signed. So huge knock-on effect, net result of huge rising unemployment. We're already seeing the first wave of that. There's a good 1-month lag in these statistics. Next month's numbers are going to be even worse. And everything points to in April, there's going to be another huge reduction in the federal workforce. So hold on. And then the second step of that is that the federal government is still supposed to do what the law says. So companies still need permits. They still need applications approved. They still need things done. Individuals still need to be able to get their benefits, right? We're seeing that the reduction and changes in Social Security, closing offices, requiring in-person visits to start benefits or to change direct deposit are causing people to fall off the rolls and lose benefits. And those individuals then are not spending money and not contributing to the economy, right? It all compounds. So even a business that wants to invest and do the right thing and makes an application, there's no one there to review it. And so they can't proceed because they can't get the permit, right? People who have been supported by these social safety net services, so the elderly, the young and poor, the disabled, right? Whether medically or born that way, whatever, these individuals are going to lose their services. Trump and Musk in particular have been extremely clear that they consider all of these to be a Ponzi scheme, quote from Musk, that they should be gone, that the people that are on these services are a waste of space. They're a burden. And that's insulting. Like, it hurts me to even say those words, but that's what they're saying, and this is what they're doing. So I think they're going to gut those programs. I think a whole bunch of people that are currently supported and stable, that have housing, that pay rent, that buy food, that get prescription medications, are going to disappear from the economy. And by disappear, I mean experience catastrophic, heart-wrenching hardship and death. That's what we're talking about here. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. So that's coming and in the near term because he's already kicking people off. He's already putting barriers in place to Social Security recipients. So the elderly largely and children under the age of 18, right? Those are the 2 largest beneficiaries of Social Security payments. So these people are, in both cases, have a reduced ability to jump through hoops. They have a reduced ability to show up at an office. And when you close half the offices and now they've got to travel 6 hours away, I know like my parents are in that age group, and it would be extremely difficult for them to travel 6 hours in a vehicle to see someone at an SSA office to change their direct deposit numbers, like, to the point they might not even be able to do it. So this pisses me off. So I think that's probable. I also think that we'll see knock-on effects to the housing market. I think where we have counted on houses not losing value, right? The only time since the Great Depression that housing has lost value was in the Great Recession of 2008, because that was, of course, a housing-driven crash, right? It was a housing bubble bursting, and that's the only time we've seen housing prices drop in 100 years. We're going to see it happen now, because the unemployment is going to drive a lot of people to have to sell their houses because it's the only asset they have and they can't pay the mortgage and they don't want it to go into foreclosure. And even if it goes into foreclosure, it's now on the market. And all of that is going to lead to a reduction in housing prices, okay, and the value of housing. We're going to see the convergence of that net household wealth is going to disappear. So your 401k gets wiped out because the stock market's crashing, because unemployment is up and businesses won't invest and businesses are closing because there's no consumer spending to keep them open. And they can't start new businesses because they can't get permits unless they can pay bribes, because that's also happening. And so it just doesn't happen. Your house loses its value, or you lose your house. And suddenly you go from being in what we would call a comfortable middle class window to being poor, to not having a home, to renting if you can get enough money together to rent, and you got nothing. So an awful lot of folks are headed for that. And that becomes a spiral, right? That's what separates a recession from a depression, is how long it lasts. Well, whenever we go down this road, we're going to look at a depression. We're not going to bounce back from this in a year, not least because Trump is elected for a 4-year term, and he's unlikely to voluntarily leave office at that point. So we're not coming out of this. Like, this is a depression. This will define a generation of people. The lack of economic opportunity and the lack of economic stability will define the young adults of today. And it will scar the working adults of today, and it will probably kill many of the elderly of today. That's where we're at. And I also think that it is unlikely that we are going to see political will, right, to peacefully remove Trump. I think it is extremely unlikely that Congress, even when everything crashes and is awful, I think it is incredibly unlikely that Congress is going to step in and remove him and let the cleanup process start. So here we are. A whole bunch of people are going to sell their houses. You know who can afford to buy them? The billionaires, the giant investment firms, the people who already have too much money and don't know what to do with it. They're going to buy your house, and they're going to buy it for cheap, and then they're going to rent it to you for more than you were paying a mortgage. And you're going to have to pay it, or you're going to live on the street. You're going to move in with your kids, your parents, your friends. We're going to have 2 or 3 families living in one house because that's the only way we make ends meet. And all the real estate is owned by the new robber barons. And they tell you what they're going to pay you, and you take it because you got to have something to live on. And we're right back in the 1870s. So you might say, well, that sounds really flippin' terrible. So what's the worst case scenario if it's not that? And so the worst case scenario from where we are now is that Trump starts a war. He has already started bombing the Houthis in Yemen. He's already, of course, talking about invading Panama, Greenland, and Canada. And he's amassing troops on the border with Mexico. So, like, this is very much a non-zero potential situation. Once he declares war, he can then declare martial law. He can assume war powers. He can push the limits of what is legal. And he's already demonstrated that he's not going to listen to the courts, right? He's demonstrating it in little ways to see what happens. but he is headed square for I don't care. If you disagree with me, I'll just have ICE arrest you and we'll say that you're an enemy of the state. Because that's what he just argued in court, that the president has the right to decide that someone is a threat to the nation and deport them, even if they're a citizen. There's not a caveat there. Even if you're a citizen, deport you without due process. That is the claim that he just made in a federal court. So I think that's pretty common. So the worst case scenario at this point, through this level, not. I don't have a warm fuzzy feeling that we're not going to land here. So you effectively have no Congress at that point. You have no judiciary. There is only the dictator and his minions. There is then no economy because businesses just close. Everything stops. When the US crosses into that, the rest of the world treats us like a pariah. No one sells us things. No one buys things. We're done. Americans are in chaos. The the stock market ticker looks like a vertical line down. And so does all of our collective household income. And of course, when you do that, people get real pissy. And we are the most armed nation on the planet. So if you put those two things together, we're looking at violence, violence in the streets. The peaceful method of dealing with this problem hasn't worked. Doesn't look like it's going to work. So people get by. Desperate people do desperate things. If you don't have a place to live and you can't count on the courts to rectify that, and you can't count on the people in charge following the rules, and you can't count on your civil liberties, some portion of people act violently. Some portion of desperate people do desperate things. And that's the reality. And while I did argue a little bit ago that he has enough support that I don't think will remove him at 45% approval rating now, and that I would be surprised to see his approval rating go below 40%, that still means that more than half the country doesn't want this. And a significant chunk of those folks will go to war for it, will fight for the country we were supposed to have. And so this is worse than the other situation because there is no stability. When the country is a war zone, there is nothing. There is nothing in stores. Stores don't exist. They're not even open. Like it's a whole different ballgame. And this is a civil war not like the last one we had. That one had a line. Like we had North and South, and there was a line, a front line of fighting. And if you were far from that front line, you could feel safe. But in this war, there's not a front line. Because in the red states, 35 to 45% are still blue. And in the blue states, 35 to 45% are still red. This country is purple. And that means that every community is a war zone. Every community is at war with itself. And that's what makes this the worst case scenario. So coming back to the economics, right? So whenever foreign countries say, your economy sucks, your country sucks, we're not trading with you, a thing called hyperinflation kicks in. So the value of the dollar, what it can buy, shrinks at an accelerated rate. So we talk about 3% inflation, 4% inflation, 6% inflation feels like a lot. Like a year at 7% inflation changed the whole country. Hyperinflation says that you could have 7% a day. You could have 50% a week. You could have prices double every 2 weeks. There are cases in other countries where hyperinflation has doubled prices every day. So even if you have money, you can't buy anything because no one believes in the value of the dollar. That's what hyperinflation means. You're resetting a whole currency. So at that point, there is nothing. Like we have widespread famine, we have widespread violence, we have nothing secure. War is awful. War is awful. And that's what makes this the worst case scenario. I hope that doesn't happen. I really, really hope this is not where we land. Okay, so we've talked through a best case, most likely, and worst case scenario. What should you do? Like, you're like, Amber, you just laid a whole bunch of crap on me and it's terrifying. I just want to curl up in a little ball under a blanket and zone out with some Netflix. I understand that feeling. And I also have favorite shows that let me escape the world for a little while. When you can come back, pick this podcast back up and start with a realistic assessment of where you are. So start by assessing your income. How sensitive is your employment, your household employment? So all the people in your house that bring in income. How sensitive is it to federal spending? Are you a federal worker? Is your work dependent on federal contracts? Is your work dependent on pass-through funding from the federal government that goes through state government agencies? Do you work in construction? Because that is hit hardest by federal funding cuts. Do you work in education? Where getting rid of funding through the Department of Education, that grant program, is going to constrain your budget and cause reductions in a workforce, right? Are you in one of these where in the short term, your employment is insecure? So ask that tough question first. If the answer is yes, what other options do you have? And be candid. This is probably going to mean a change of career. It's going to mean a step down. It's going to mean not making the money that you used to make that your budget is built on, but finding a job that gets income. Okay, so brainstorm. What else could I do? So, like we are in my family, one of us is a federal worker, and his job is very precarious in the current environment. And we're looking at it like, well, you used to code, right? That's a skill. Maybe we can do something with that. We each have other abilities. I can build things. We can grow things. Are there things we could do that could bring in an income and let us close a gap? What can we cut from our budget? Have that conversation now. What would our budget look like if that income was gone? Okay, so do that. Then start looking around and say, who could I call on? Right? So if there's no way to reconcile that budget, or if you're a single person, or you're a person who's dependent on benefits, who could you reach out to help you? So that's the next thing. Then, sorry, I'm getting a random error here. So then look at the reverse. So if you're relatively stable, okay, and make a list of those people. Who might you need to support? Do you have older parents who may not be able to continue in their current living situation because their in-home health care gets cut, because they can't afford medications, because they can't afford the retirement home if their benefits are cut? Do you have siblings who are in a more precarious position? Do you have children who are going to be in a precarious position? Do you have other people you care about who are in a more precarious position? Right? Make a list. These are people that, if you have the ability, you should be planning for. And then do a check on what is your baseline level of food and water. Right? So we're going to talk more about building up a pantry supply. But one of the first things that causes desperation is a lack of food and water. If you are an average American who keeps only a day or two of food really on hand, maybe 3, then you really need to work on that. Okay, so do a really candid inventory of what is the food I have in the house, what is the water I have on hand, and start making a plan. So the next thing, once you have figured those things out, is to start acting, right? So build up your food supplies. The easiest way, if you haven't already started doing this, right? And I know a lot of people who watch me or that I know are already on top of building up and having more food on hand than average and those things. But if you are a person who is an average American who does have that 2 or 3 days of food on hand, the easiest way I know to get started is to make a list of 4 meals that your family will always eat. Every time you fix it, everyone eats it. Make a grocery list based on those 4 meals and start building up so that you have all 4 of those meals on hand all the time. Then look at what are the other things that I can build up. Okay. Now, in picking 4 meals, bend toward things that don't require fresh produce or fresh meat. Fresh produce won't store, obviously. A lot of times you can substitute dehydrated or canned, and it's not quite the same, but it'll get you there. Like everyone will still eat it. Build that up. The next easiest thing to do is to go through a rotation when you're at the grocery store based on whatever your budget is. One grocery trip, stock up on an extra grain. So rice is an easy one. Almost everybody can eat rice. Almost nobody's allergic to it. You can do lots of things with rice. Get a package of rice, a package being whatever fits your budget. The next time, pick a protein. So this is typically going to be a legume, a bean, beans, lentils. Get a package. Then pick a vegetable the next trip. So any kind of canned vegetable. Okay. And I know canned doesn't taste as good and it's got salt and all the things, but get it. And then pick a fat. So get an olive oil, a canola oil, a vegetable oil, a ghee, right? Something like that. And then start again back at the grain and just do that in sequence every time you go to the store using whatever resources you have. And you will end up with a reasonably stocked pantry that you can eat from for quite a while. Get at least 10 gallons of water. So you can reuse water bottles, you can buy special containers, you can reuse 2-liter soda bottles, whatever. Just get 10 gallons of water on hand per person in your house. Work toward that. Save up at least a month of expenses. If you don't have that already, get there. Like you need it. And keep that a in a savings account. If your bank is reasonably large and stable, I'm not opposed to having some of it in cash, because several of these scenarios could result in banks closing for some period of time, and your landlord or your mortgage company is still going to expect to get paid. So save up at least a month of expenses. If you already have more than that, great. Keep saving. And last, plant a garden. This is the right season in the US. Grow your own food, even if it is a pot on a small balcony, a window box of lettuce, anything you can do. And you can watch my channel. I'm talking about Survival Garden 2025, all of those. I've got other shows on that. So go look at that. Then look around you. What are the resources in your community already? Where are the food pantries? Where are the homeless shelters? Because either you're going to be a person that needs them, or you're going to be a person who needs to support them. Because if you have the resources, those organizations are going to need them. There are going to be a whole lot more people going to them. And last, start building a community of support. Know your neighbors, even those neighbors. Because the reality is the only way we get from 45 to 40 to 35 to 30% who approve of what this guy's doing is one-on-one face-to-face contact, one-on-one conversation, and making our side seem better, right? Giving an alternative. So even those neighbors, get to know your neighbors. Call the people that were on those lists. If you think you may have to abandon ship and phone a friend, right? Because you're in a bad spot, call them ahead of time and be like, hey, I'm worried about this situation. You can send them the link to this video. It'll be posted on Friday. And can we have a conversation about what that might look like? If you expect other people to come and live with you, call them up. Hey, life is scary. Wanted to let you know that if you need help, you can call me. And let's have a conversation about that, right? So start building that community. Get involved in organizations in your area that are trying to resist, that are trying to build mutual aid, that are trying to do the right thing to get us all through this. So do that. If you have resources, read money and time, definitely protest. Be in the street, be visible, make those phone calls, try and push to limit the damage, right? We are in damage control mode. It is going down fast. Do that. Keep pushing, go through the courts, do anything you can, whatever is within your scope. If you have enough resources, if you have enough bandwidth, if you have a passion, if you have connections, use them. Donate to organizations. Continue to increase your own food storage because even if you don't need it, other people will. There will be hungry people in your community. Build up your own cash reserves. And I mean cash, in your house cash. Build up your savings. Focus on local businesses that buy local because that local supply chain is the one most likely to survive an economic collapse. Okay? In what we're going to and what is coming in either the most likely or the worst case scenario, we're going to get real local. And you are only going to have the resources that exist in about a 10 or 20-mile radius of your house. So start supporting them now. And if you got bandwidth, grow a bigger garden, grow a bigger garden, grow a bigger garden, grow food because people are going to need to eat. Okay. So with that, we'll wrap this up and say I'm going to do a week of podcasts in 2 weeks on food storage. So how do you decide what you're going to buy? What are the strategies you can do on a budget to start building up that food storage plan? I'm going to post some other helpful resources. I've got a spreadsheet calculator to help you figure out, well, if I'm going to have to feed me and my kids and their spouses, so I've got 6 adults that are going to be in this house and we need to have at least a month of food on hand. What does that even look like? What do I buy? So I have a calculator that does that math that I'll introduce that week. And if you support me on Patreon for like $5 a month, then you can download that calculator and use it, no problem. Okay. And then, of course, like and subscribe the channel. Stay tuned here. Send me your questions, right? The whole reason I'm doing this channel is to help people know that you have options, you have power, you have strength. You are the strong people who are going to create the good times out of these bad times. I believe in you. I believe in your power and your ability, and I am here to help in whatever way I can. So let me know what you want to see. Post it in the comments here, social media anywhere. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. Let me know what you want to see. Okay? All right. I appreciate you guys, and good luck.